Hi, I'm Todd Baratz, and I'm the only one telling you to lower your expectations.
Hi, I'm Laura Cathcart Robbins. This is the Only One in the Room podcast, but I'm never the only one in this room because, as usual, my boyfriend, producer, and co host, Scott Slaughter, who I call Hun, is here as well.
Hi, honey.
Hey, Hun. So today we have Todd Baratz with us. He is the author of How to Love Someone Without Losing Your Mind, Forget the Fairy Tale and Get Real. He is a renowned psychotherapist and sex therapist whose innovative approach to mental health and relationships has established him as a leading figure in this field.
That's awesome.
I have so many questions,
I know,
Todd,
right?
already, just
I'm
from
here
that
to answer.
introduction. But welcome to the show.
Hi. Hi to
Hi.
both of you.
Yeah, it's good to see you. And we were chatting a little bit before we started recording about we're on different coasts and you're experiencing the kind of hot, sticky weather over there, right? In New York.
Always in New York, yes. I
Yeah.
do miss the dry heat of LA.
Yeah. Yeah. We've been in the
That's
90s though, not this week, but for us, it's been pretty warm. Usually like you were in the 80s, I think, around now.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still, I'll take it over the humid heat, of the East
I much
Coast.
prefer a sauna than a steam room.
There you go. There you go. Um, so you're a psychotherapist and a sex therapist?
I am. I specialize in sex therapy, but I see people for all kinds of reasons.
So can you give me an example of an issue you might deal with or something that's common for you to deal with as a sex therapist?
Yeah, I mean, when I say sex therapist, people often assume that I'm talking about dicks and clits all day, but it's usually just a lot of relational anxiety. So if I'm seeing a couple, they're not coming in necessarily for sex. Usually it's something like communication. Everyone comes in and says we have communication issues. So that's probably the most common thing that I'll see, either communication issues or low desire or differing libidos. Those are the two most common things that I see. And both of which aren't the actual categories usually that are unfolding in their relationship. It tends to be the container, the way that people understand what's happening in the relationship, but it's usually much more to the story.
So like, for instance, someone who's coming in to talk about having low desire, you're going to look at a broader issue there than not just like why the libido is low.
It's usually a constellation of issues. Everything is so systemic and so related and so nuanced and contextual that, someone might be talking about having a different libido than their partner, but there might be conflict under the surface, or it might just be a difference that they are not negotiating because of a history of sexual shame or anxiety or relational anxiety or attachment issues. But there's always a much broader or deeper, meaningful story behind the complaint.
As there is with you, there is a
Yes.
much broader and deeper emotional story. I'm really interested in your story. This is a storytelling podcast,
Mhm.
and I definitely want to talk to you about like I guess advice is advice the right word that you dispense to people?
Sure.
But
Yeah.
I really wanted to talk about your story, if that's okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Um, you and I grew up in the same state. I grew up in
Yeah.
Cambridge. You
Oh
grew
my
up,
God.
yeah, you were in
Cambridge.
Newton, right?
I was in Newton. Yeah. I know
Um,
Cambridge.
yeah, I loved Cambridge. I went to the Cambridge Montessori School, which is still
Oh,
there on Field
yeah.
Street. And and Newton was, if from the way I remember it, Newton was really nice. Is that right?
Yeah, Newton is really nice.
Yeah.
It's a very nice suburb. I think it's technically a city, but it's nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I just remember like when we were there just walking around and all the mature trees and it was really
Yeah.
green and pretty,
It's
like really pretty
beautiful.
shops and
Yeah.
homes.
Yeah. It was a good place to grow up.
Tell me about your family there growing up.
My family. Let's go right to it. My family growing up, very dysfunctional, chaotic. And so as a result, I was very dysfunctional and chaotic as a child and teenager. My dad was very sick. Um, physically, emotionally, in all of the different ways. And I was the youngest of four. Um, there was a lot that I didn't understand. There was a lot that I struggled with in response to the dynamics of my family. So I started therapy very, very young, which was the best thing my parents have ever done for me. Uh,
How young? How young were you?
I started at 10.
Yeah.
Um, my dad was really, he was just horrible, kind of. And we all went to therapy, but he refused to go. Either way, again, it was really great that I went. I started at 10, and I've been in therapy ever since. And I'm still seeing the same therapist that I started seeing when I was 15.
Really?
Um, yeah, I see him
Wow.
I see him every week.
That's
Derek, I read him
amazing.
in the book. Yeah.
That's really amazing. You was your dad disabled, or was he
Yeah.
ill? Or was the illness the disability?
All of the above.
All of the
he
above.
had, he was physically disabled, mentally I mean, he had a lot of issues happening going on.
And then so you I love that they put you in therapy at 10. How did that
Same.
happen? Did you ask? Did they volunteer it?
No, the teacher at school said that I was not paying attention, and that I wasn't concentrating, and that I was hyper, or I don't really remember what she said, but that was when the ADD evaluations started. And then after that, I was medicated, and then after that, I started therapy.
Mm.
So it came from school, but all of my brothers were in therapy. My mother was in therapy, so it was just kind of like I was next up, and so it was my
It's your
time.
turn at 10.
Yeah,
Which is not as uncommon now to see
right.
children in therapy in,
Yeah,
circa 2024.
yeah.
But
Um,
but
but back then,
yeah.
I don't, there wasn't that therapy really wasn't being talked about as this thing that people should do, which
Yeah.
thankfully it is now.
Yeah. When was back then? What era are we talking
Again,
about?
I was born in 86, so 96.
Okay. All right. The 90s. The 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I had my first kid at I have 2 sons, and I had my first one in 1998, and I definitely struggled with postpartum anxiety afterward, but
Mhm.
there wasn't that language then. It was just postpartum depression, and
Yeah.
if it didn't fall under that category, it wasn't considered to be something that they would look at in the same way. So, there's a lot of differences back then. There was definitely less language for stuff and a lot more generalization for symptoms or, whatever one was going through.
Yeah. And this is how, and I try to make this a major point and theme in the book, but this is how culture shapes our reality and defines it.
Mm,
um, that someone's experience of their mental health, of their identity today, is much different than it was 30 years ago, and will be much, much different 30 years from now. That
right.
time is a really big factor and feature of who we are, that often gets unacknowledged, which is why storytelling is so important to better understand our stories and where we come from, to better equip ourselves to find where we're going.
Exactly. So this was another piece of your story that I really liked. I just want to just mention that in your book, you say that during adolescence, you struggled with depression and anxiety, addictions to different substances, just really seeking relief from those substances, right?
Mm. Mhm.
Um, and then you say growing up gay in a family that was not entirely accepting added another layer of difficulty. So, could you just give us kind of a picture of what that not entirely accepting that you were gay looked like in your house? Was it just not discussed? Was there anger
Um,
or
I mean, I came out when I was 15, or I was outed by my brother. I wasn't ready to come out. He said that he was doing it to protect me because my father was pretty homophobic, and
mm,
I think everybody was homophobic in the 90s, and I mean, historically.
yeah,
Um, and so oftentimes it was, about calling me a fag, or talking about how I acted wasn't aligned with being a man, or think just things like that. It wasn't a safe environment for um, someone who wasn't masculine, and I mean, not masculine. So
yeah.
It was just very clear that that wasn't an accepted reality in my family.
So what I understand that completely, but what did you do as a result of that, of being outed before you were ready to be outed and then living in an environment where you knew you weren't being accepted? Did you go, is that when the substances kind of came in, or was that the depression at that point?
It was everything. I mean, I really imploded. Um, Whether or not it was about being gay or about the abuse in my family or about the culture, it was all of it. And I didn't have support. It wasn't acknowledged. I was blamed. I had my therapist, Derek, who, saved my life through this period of time. But it was everything. I think we all want to find like one thing or the solution or the answer or the problem, but it's usually really multi-layered. And for me, it really was. It was about the abuse, the dysfunction, attachment issues, being gay. It was just a cumulative mind fuck. Where then I just started doing a ton of drugs, started drinking. My parents moved away, so I could do whatever the fuck I wanted to do. So I really just spiraled out of control. But it was the only thing that I, at the time, could do to regulate myself because I was experiencing such intense dysregulation, um, and internal turmoil that I literally couldn't calm myself any other way. Um, it was a horrific time.
First of all, thank you for that. Thank you for letting us in, giving us that window into your life and what that was like. And I think that for people who are coming of age right now, it can be hard to imagine that there were the consensus was kind of anti at that time. And that if you were different in any way, there was reason to hide. And I feel like now, certainly for the first time since I've been alive, differences are more embraced than ever. And like we were talking about earlier, I know you're kind of like, well, but no, I'm just saying than they ever have been before.
Compared to the past,
Yeah,
yes.
compared to the past. Not like we're where we need to be, but there are like my kids, their generation, the people, their peers, they take mental health days when they need it. And there are no questions asked, right? It's like I need a personal day or I need a mental health day. That was unheard of in the 90s. You couldn't just take off because you needed a mental health day. And so things have progressed a little bit, but I really appreciate you giving us that window in. Um, the next thing I wanted to talk to you about, because this was also really interesting to me, and I'm going to read something from your book. Um, this is your mom talking. And your mom says, I got married at 22, and even then, my mother thought I was gay, meaning that was late to get married, right?
Mhm.
Um, they wanted you to marry at 18, 20. And if you didn't, you were either gay, stupid, or ugly. I wanted to escape my family, so this is the only way out I saw. I was taught that love meant finding someone who would marry you and have kids. And then I'll skip down a little bit. And uh, so the conversation is about you asking her, right? Like about how she found love or like how she fell in love, like that. Was that how that started?
Yeah, I wanted to know her story.
Yeah.
I wanted to know about growing up. I wanted to know about her parents. I wanted to know about what love meant back then,
Yeah.
what marriage meant back then, what relationships meant, expectations. Um, I wanted to know all of it.
Yeah.
And it's something that I talk about in terms of intergenerational trauma, intergenerational experience, regardless of trauma, is that if we're not asking our parents these questions, if we don't know these stories, which most people don't because most parents aren't sharing, and most families do operate around the rules of, don't ask.
Mhm.
And so it's a big piece of our story that's missing if we don't know our parents' story. Um, so I wanted to make sure that I knew that. And I was
Yeah.
also interested as a therapist. I spend all day talking to people about their history, um, and mine felt incomplete without knowing my mother's and my father's.
Yeah. I I also, so it goes on to say, this is her talking again then. Oh no, this is you. Sorry. You say, I began to tear up. Um, I'd known her stepfather was cold because she's told you more of her history, but I hadn't known he was abusive. My father had also been abusive, and I was scared of him. My mother would often cry to me, telling me things she shouldn't have. Um, and after the interview, I cried for her. This is you again talking. I cried for myself. I cried for my clients. I cried for you. And what I understood here was that your mom was repeating a pattern, right? Your grandmother had told your mom things or confided in her about things that were inappropriate. Is that what I, things
Yeah,
that maybe shouldn't have been told to a child from a parent?
yeah.
And, and then your mom was crying to you and repeating the same pattern.
Hmm.
So, how do you be a place that can, you know, be a landing place for that story of your history without becoming a confidant in an inappropriate way? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question, because it is complicated. You know, I think age plays a really big role in this. You know, as adults, um, I do believe that we should be prepared to hear about our parents' trauma. As children, however, I don't think so. Um, and so I was happy to hear these things from my mom. I mean, not happy, but I wanted to. I was asking. I wanted the information. I wanted to learn about her as a human being, not just as the mother who did or didn't do what I wanted or needed as a child, or
Mm,
not just as this kind of receptacle that I was supposed to receive things from. I wanted to humanize her, and similarly with my father. But I mean, when she would tell me things as a child about my father, that was certainly inappropriate. So, there is something to be said about parentifying a child, or false empowerment, which is when a parent shares things, asks of children to do things that they really shouldn't be,
right.
that kids don't have the emotional capacity to manage, regulate, or actually support.
What do you think was your response to having those things told to you when you were a child? Did you take more responsibility? Is that kind of what drove you toward being a therapist because you had
Mm,
been the
yeah.
confidant?
Yeah, I saw this meme the other day. I wish I could remember exactly what it said, but it was something like, I don't know, why are you a therapist? And it was like, because I was been my mom's therapist since I was a child. And I was like, same. Um, it was much funnier than
Yeah.
that, but
No,
the
but
the
it's true, right?
yeah, I mean, as a kid, I thought it was what I had to offer. Um, I thought it was what I needed to do to be loved.
Mm,
Um, it was what I had to do to give love, and these things still, um, describe some of that for me at times.
right. Right. So you leave for New York for college?
Yes, I escaped.
Yes. Escape to New York. That's a movie, right?
It should. I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
so many half the people in this city have escaped from somewhere.
Did you have a romantic relationship when you were in Massachusetts when you were a kid? Were you,
Yeah,
yeah,
I had several.
you had
Uh,
several.
yeah, I've always been a relationship person.
Mm-hmm.
And my first boyfriend when I was, I mean, I had girlfriends before when I was not out, but my first real relationship, I think, was like 15, 14 or 15, and then another one at 16, and then another at 17.
So what was the dynamic? Was there a pattern of dynamic in those relationships or was it nothing
Mm,
identifiable?
I don't know. I was. on a lot of drugs.
Ah, yeah.
um, and dissociated from all of the trauma around me. I don't really remember them being bad or dysfunctional relationships. I remember them ending being really,
Mm.
really hard for me.
Mhm.
One ended, and it was really what sent me down a dark alleyway. It was also, I was living in my house alone because my parents had moved away. I was like 16. I was living alone. Um,
Wait, your
so it
parents
was
moved
less of a,
away?
yeah, they were old. My father was ill. Florida, I guess, felt better in their bodies. They were retired. And I was like, go. They're like, do you mind if we go? And I was like, no, go. I'm like a 15-year-old cokehead. I was like, get out, go. I want to be alone. Um, but that wasn't a good idea.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I don't remember those relationships. I do remember really loving them though, and not, you know, being hurt by them or mistreated in any way.
Mhm. Um, so you escaped to New York, you're in college, you were fully out. You have kind of a clean slate
Full
there, right?
blown. Yeah.
Kind of. Um, and how quickly do you meet the person that's going to be like the relationship that you have for the next 10 years or that 10-year relationship?
I met him after I graduated school. I finished college, and my parents cut me up, so I moved to live with them in Florida, and it was there that I met Alex.
In Florida.
Yeah,
Ah, okay. So,
which felt like such a punishment at the time,
yeah.
having to leave New York to go to live in Florida. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
what is
What
that?
part of Florida?
They are in Boca
Ah, yeah.
Raton.
I am really familiar. I have a lot of family in Florida. Um, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people from Massachusetts do the Florida thing.
Yeah, yeah. My dad's actually my parents were divorced when I was little. My dad's always lived in Florida. Different
Hmm.
parts, but that's
Where?
that's how I end up having family there.
Okay.
So tell me then about what your expectations were going into the relationship with him, like what you thought. Like, did you think this was your forever person and that you'd be married and build a life together? Um,
No, I had no idea. I had no expectations. I mean, I was 21. It started off as just sex, and it was good. So I continued to see him, but I wasn't like, oh, I want to spend the rest of my life with this person. I don't even think I was there yet. Um, I was doing way less drugs when I was in college. I was much better, not trying to kill myself every 5 seconds, but I was still, deeply struggling. And the idea of, you know, thinking about my future was still very hard. So I think that was a piece of it. I think also like growing up in my family, they knew I was gay and they weren't necessarily pressuring me to get married and people weren't having kids. So the whole gay long-term relational marriage children thing wasn't as it is sort of today. So anyway, I wasn't really entering with expectations. When I asked my mom her story and she said she did it to get away from her family, I kind of ended up in the relationship to get away from my family.
mm,
um, I learned a lot about myself in this interview. I don't even know if I wrote that in the book, but I met Alex, and sex was good, and I was living with my parents at the time, and it was hell. So I just spent as much time as I possibly could away from them, and I ended up developing feelings for him that were really strong and deep, without expectations of this is going to be a forever thing. It was just something that, in the moment, in the present time, gave me such a relief from the awfulness I felt with my parents, that chose to um, I chose not to lead my life based on what do I want in my future.
mhm,
I
mm,
I don't know if it was conscious, but it was more about what feels good right now. I'm going to do that,
yeah. Also,
and it felt good,
yeah,
so I
you're
did
in
that.
your 20s, so
Yeah.
that's part of that, I think. I mean, That's actually not true. There are a lot of people in their 20s that know exactly what they want, and they get married young and they have kids and they build a life with a partner. But the people that I grew up around when I was in my 20s, we weren't looking to do that yet. It was much more like exploration and trying on
Well,
things and seeing what
yeah,
fit.
but it
Um,
quickly evolved into something much larger and integrated and serious.
mhm. And then, so what was that like for you?
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
Um, it was the best relationship I've ever had. As compared to my parents and my brothers and my friends and past partners. Building a family with somebody else that was safe, that wasn't abusive, that wasn't traumatic, where I could feel accepted. We had a dog, we had a place, it was so much fun. It was wonderful. Um, and I think it was just what I needed at the time.
Mhm. And so take me to the end of that relationship then, and what that was like.
It took me forever to end the relationship because of what I just described. I loved him so much. Our life together had brought me so much meaning, um, so much safety, so much protection. Um, my entire 20s, I was with him. So I kind of grew up and became an adult in the context of being in a relationship. So I'd never been on my own. Um, so making the deciding to end the relationship was a multi-year process. I had inklings that maybe there's something else out there. Maybe I wanted to end it, but I didn't want to hurt him, but I didn't want to hurt myself. Blah, blah, blah. It took me fucking forever. We broke up, got back together, broke up, got back together, did long distance for a period of time because I didn't want to be in Florida. And then finally I ended it. But it was one of the most difficult decisions I've ever had to make. And I write about the endings of relationships a lot, and it's just not really addressed, which is unfortunate because it's such a transformative and hard experience. But
Mm,
my life completely changed and transformed as a result of it. But it was excruciating, and it took me years to get over.
yeah, I can understand that. I also understand the kind of dance at the doorway, not leaving, but getting up to the doorway and thinking, I'm going to go, and then
Yeah.
staying. And it sounds like you were in love with the relationship, but maybe were you in love with him at the end, or were you just in love with the relationship, or was it both?
Mm. Both. Both. It was just I knew that I wanted more. I wanted to, not to say that he wasn't enough, or maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But um, I loved him deeply. I mean, after I ended the relationship, I wanted to get back together with him for years, and he wouldn't get back together with me. I mean, it was a bit of a mess. But I don't know. It was complicated.
Yeah, I mean,
I
yeah,
loved him. I just, there were things missing from the relationship. There were trust issues. Um, uh, I couldn't see myself building a life with him. And so those expectations finally crept in.
hmm.
Um,
Mm.
and so that's really ultimately what made me end it.
Were you a therapist at that point?
I had just begun, yeah, I was 3 or 4 years into my practice, which
Hmm.
was a piece of it. We didn't communicate ever. Both of us avoided things, myself included. It was just not an open relationship. It was fun, and but it wasn't one where we were enacting something mature. And I include myself in it. I also think again it was the time. Like now, relationships are under the microscope. It's really intense. Even 6 or 7 years ago, they weren't.
Mm.
There was sort of people were shamed for staying if someone cheated, but this sense of communicate, set boundaries, toxic this, toxic that. That hypervigilance around relationships is fairly new now. So, it's funny. I spoke with him recently, and he's like, "All I do is communicate now." I'm like, "Of course, that's all you do now." Um,
Uh,
that's where we are culturally, where most people are.
Yeah. Do you feel as a therapist and when you're in a relationship that there's extra pressure on you to be the communicator, to set the boundaries, to do you know what I mean? Like because you know better, do you feel like you're expected to do
Mhm.
better?
Um, I think people have that expectation of me, but that's their stuff. I
Right.
can't. I'm not going to take responsibility for it. But yeah, I mean, sometimes some of my friends I've met, and they're like, "I thought you would have everything together, and you don't." I'm like, "Ouch!" Like, no, I don't. Or my partner now will say, "It's funny you talk about communicating and being blah blah blah, and you just shut down." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a human being with my own history."
Right.
Um, but I definitely push myself and think I have a lot of skills.
Yeah. Well,
No,
let's talk about kind of this transition from you being somebody who ended a relationship, going through the pains of that, the transformation of that, being a therapist, and then going out to the public at large through social media. Tell me about that.
I mean, I started my Instagram account because I started to date for the first time. I never liked Instagram. I was really resistant, but the guys I was going on dates with were, "What's your Instagram? What's your Instagram?" I was like, "I don't have one." So that's really why I started it. And then opened the app and I saw all of this shit and I was like, oh, people are writing about stuff and I like this and I don't like that. And so then I was like, I'll just write my own stuff because this seems kind of fun. And then it just took off from there. But it was never like, I'm going to do this so it can be part of my business model or so I can be an influencer or something like that. It was more about having a profile for my dates to see and my own creative outlet.
So, but I mean, I really enjoy that because so many people are struggling to build a brand and gain followers, and that was not your intent when starting it, and you have a gang of followers, like, you have a lot of followers, and, you have a really unique message, I think, on for from what I've seen, because I've been out of the dating game for, oh my gosh, I went over 20 years, more than that, though, because I was with him for 17 years, and then I met Scott. We met the day we checked into rehab, just about 16 years ago.
Wow.
So all that to say, I haven't dated for a really long time. So I don't follow a lot of dating.
Honey, we're still dating right now.
I know, but it's not the same. It's not the same as, looking for a date and then trying on
I know.
someone new. Um, but I mean, it's a lot of followers for dating, and it's great that you just started it to kind of have something for your dates to look at, right?
Yeah.
As you were getting out there. Why do you think it took off the way that it did? What were you doing that other people weren't doing?
Um, I mean, there's two different versions of this answer. I could give you the version of what I think I was doing that other people were not doing, and also luck. Um, Now Instagram is ridiculous. I mean, the algorithm this, the algorithm that. I think it's much, much harder to grow a platform for some reason. I don't really understand why. Once I got to a certain point, I stopped growing, blah, blah, blah. Instagram has changed, so it's not that easy. Um, but the other version is I mean, I think I just had a very blunt and direct, real approach, which is just how I am. And so I think people liked that. I mean, I was challenging a lot of the status quo.
Yes.
Um,
How
I
were you doing that? Tell me some of the ways you were doing that.
I mean, all of these listicles, all of this way of reducing a person, a relationship down to a binary of good or bad. And
Mhm.
that's let's say 50% of content, informational content, both on social media and just on websites. It's reductive, decontextualized, no nuance, etc. If a partner is either good or bad. Um, you know, there was no one talking about how disappointing people are. There was no one talking about how you're going to be really angry and doubt your relationship, and that's normal. So, you know, in my last relationship, I was constantly disappointed and doubting it, and I thought it was just the worst thing ever. So then I started writing this stuff, knowing that it was normal, and I think it really spoke to people, and it was relieving for people to finally get permission to feel certain things that countered the kind of cultural value system of idealizing and reducing and all of this fantasy stuff.
The fantasy stuff.
Yeah,
So one of the
that's
things, yeah, you said, I think you said this in a Time magazine interview, was it wasn't to, but basically like, don't be so quick to dismiss.
hmm.
You didn't say that. That's not exactly verbatim what you said, but that's how I read it. It was like, if they have bad breath, maybe try telling them that they have bad breath.
Here's mint.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
yours a mint. Thank you. That's a much nicer way than saying you have bad breath. Um, but certainly I have been the recipient of those calls from girlfriends who have gone out with somebody and been like, girl, no, he was blah, blah, blah. He was wearing this. He didn't know what the capital of blah, blah, blah was. And so he's done. Like I'm never going out with him again. And I, sometimes I co-sign that. Sometimes I'm like, I'm with you. But when I was reading what you were saying, it made a lot of sense to me that maybe, especially since the pool seems to be so shallow, like especially in Los Angeles for available
Yeah,
men.
definitely.
Yeah. Or
It's
available
part of the reason
people,
I
I
moved back
guess.
to New York.
Right. Are we the worst, do you think, in LA?
No, I
No?
actually had started to make more friends in LA than I have here.
Mm,
Just dating. I think the
interesting.
gays were a little bit different in the city.
Yeah. So tell me, just give me a little bit more about that, about not being so quick to dismiss and what maybe like if you're giving advice now, like this would be the advice portion of the podcast, what someone should do if they find themselves on a date and they're really looking for that Zaza zoo. They're looking for that thing that all the antennas are up and this is the right person. Um, but something comes up, and so then it's like, oh, that's a flag on the play. I'm out.
Yeah, I would just say stop. It's it's too much work. People are doing too much. And it's about anxiety. The one is about anxiety. The perfect person's about anxiety, and it's really unacknowledged anxiety repackaged as health, or people are given permission to seek out this kind of idealized perfection in a partner in the form of empowerment. But it's really not. It's just disconnection. It's a lack of vulnerability. Um, and it's why people are so alone. And this is for friendship, for romantic partnership, for sexual partners, for everything. When you're going on a first date or a second date, you can't begin to even start to understand who somebody is. And if we're entering these dynamics with the desire to understand someone else, we are not focusing on these red flags or someone's breath. Sure, it can be off-putting, and collect that data, store it, understand, acknowledge it if it's really something that is off-putting. But the real goal is to try to get to know someone and to let them get to know you, and to see how that happens, and how to see what that experience is like, and to have
Mm,
fun.
yeah.
So usually when I'm talking to people, I'm like, well, did you have fun? And they're like, I went on a date. It was 3 hours. I'm like, first, I'm like, Jesus, 3 hours. I can barely stand myself for 3 hours. And they're like, it was 3 hours, but I didn't want to go out with him. I was like, so wait, you can spend 3 hours with somebody having a conversation, but you don't want to go out with them because you just didn't feel a spark. Um, and so, it's important to acknowledge that you don't feel this intense feeling, but most people are anxious on dates. And so anxiety is going to prevent that intensity. Because if you're on high alert, if you're looking to filter somebody out, you're not looking to connect.
Mm-hmm.
If
Yeah.
you're insecure, it's hard to connect. And connection and the sharing of that affect is the vulnerability, is what creates a spark.
Yes.
So people need to give others much more of a chance in every single context, especially dating.
I think that's really interesting, and it feels very counter to what a lot of what I read and a lot of the advice that's being given, which is
Yeah,
to be,
which is a bummer.
yeah, it is, right? But
Yeah.
to be really selective and to really, have a list of
I was
things
just
that
about to
you,
say, have a list.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And if they don't, make 9 out of 10 items on that list, that's not your person.
People are
Um,
shopping.
yeah. Are you dating right now? Are you in a
Yeah, I'm
relationship?
in a relationship.
You
It's a new
are?
relationship.
Oh, nice. I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
is it somebody that you sparked with right away, or did you kind of push through some things to find your way to the spark?
There was a spark, but it wasn't like I'm gonna spend the rest of my life with this person. Oh my God, they're the one. It was I had a really nice time with this person. I'd like to see them again.
Yeah.
I mean, I have very low expectations. I just want to have fun with somebody. I just want to enjoy my time with them. And so for me, that's a spark. It wasn't like a head over heels, oh my God, cartoon. But it was like, oh, well, that was nice. I want to see him again.
Mm, yeah. I love
And
that.
the excitement filled after that.
Well, and you hear in a lot of cultures where there's like a marriage and then there's a love marriage, that people who are enter into marriages without even meeting each other sometimes find their way to that,
Mhm.
right? They get to know each other enough so that they find that they're actually having a good time with the person that they were set up with, or the marriage was arranged with. And I just think it's really refreshing. I was a little shocked at first when I was looking at your Instagram and saw your messaging and read some of your book. I was like, this is kind of nothing I've ever heard before. but but it makes so much sense that the pressure that we put on ourselves to find the person by this certain age so that we can grow old together, um and that person, like we said before, has to have these things. It's what was I was watching something, I can't remember what it was, but it was kind of what you just said. I just To just go into it to have a good time, it's such a novel idea. It it really is, and that's what dating should be, right?
Yes, it should be about fun.
Yeah.
Relationships should be about connection and fun and the pleasure in that connection.
Yes. So, I see we're at time. I want to be mindful of your time because I know you got to get out of here, but um, I really want to thank you for your time. I know we had a little tech glitch in the middle, and you were so patient. I appreciate it.
For your time and the really meaningful questions.
Oh, thank you,
Very
thank
sweet.
you. Anything you want to tell our listeners before I ask you how they can find you?
I think I've said it all.
Yeah. Great, great. So tell me how they can find you.
You can find me on Instagram at Your Diag Nonsense, or you can go to my website, which is my name, toddsbaratz.com. Instagram's probably easier.
It's very easy to find you on Instagram.
I should have made my website like 1256 so I could just spell my name out. Same with my email. Anyway,
Ah,
you can find me on Instagram.
yes, yes. And then through Instagram, they can find your website, right? Okay.
Yep, yep.
Perfect. Perfect. That'll be in the show notes as well. But Todd, thank you so much. And, I will definitely be recommending your book to people who are like putting themselves through the ringer and, trying to figure out how they can, like, the clock is ticking, kind of, my friends whose clock is ticking, and just have them get back to the basics of fun. Yeah.
Yes, have fun. Have more
Yeah.
fun.
Thank you.
You.